All right.
Right. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Logico-Philosophicus Society. As you, our loyal viewers, know, in life there are a number of very common and repeated power relationships. There's the parent-step, and tonight we're going to talk about another one, the penetrator-penetratee relationship.
Yes.
And also science. We're going to talk about science too.
In this case, though, we are are the penetrators, and the listeners are going to be penetrated with our knowledge. But
Into
first,
their minds, right? Yeah.
into their minds, right? This is not, not the bad kind. So
Just a new version of the teacher position, learning position, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Puts it just a whole new spin.
For our Japan lovers out there, there's also the senpai-kohai relationship, so we'll just mention that one too. Why not? But first, let's talk about science. Let's get science out of the way, because actually I thought this chapter on science was really interesting. Despite, I think I need more time to let it settle in my mind. The question in the beginning of this chapter is scientific knowledge objective? And he launches into a long conversation about the nature of science and the nature of objectivity, and even gets into a brief discussion on miracles. Fascinating chapter. I recommend anyone to read it. What do we want to do with this? Now, I guess part of our way of going about it is assuming that our readers have followed up and read this chapter, or at least read part of the book. But, okay, let me just try to get the nuts and bolts of what's going down here, and then please argue with me about what I've got wrong. And I'm sure I've gotten a lot wrong. So this is going to be the simplest, most simple interpretation possible. So the entire thing he's getting at here is scientific knowledge objective? And he gets into the notion of what is scientific knowledge, and he compares it to what the prow of the boat and the record of its wake. In other words, what science is a project of discovering something unknown that is of use to others, right? It has to have not a particular relevance, but a kind of a universal reference to all kinds of situations. So, in other words, science is going to be discovering what's unknown yet, and then as we discover the unknown, it gets pulled back into the general knowledge and slowly starts to become just common facts of the world. So that's what he means by the prow of the boat and the record of its wake. So in a weird way, like all of our common sense was at one time, well, some of it, not all of it, some of it was at one time science, just the act of science, like discovering that, I don't know, the sun was not the one going around the earth or something, right? Like, so
You'd let someone go with balls.
Yeah, right. I mean, like discovering why that would be, or all this that's seeped into our common language is kind of the result of science. But it's interesting. I don't think he calls it the record of its wake, but I think he thinks of science as more the prow of the boat, right? In other words, the science is the constant pushing into the unknown, and the stuff that we already have, this knowledge that's on all the encyclopedias, that's all finished science. I mean, it seems like he wouldn't even call that science per se. It's the kind of the record of what science has done.
It almost seems like he begrudgingly gives that a position. He says like it's an action, and maybe like you could consider it also a body of knowledge. But I think he's much more concerned with the action of doing science.
Yes.
You also kind of like the record of the wake, that remains in the domain of science for a little while. And then it becomes common knowledge, and then eventually it even perhaps fades away into just underlying beliefs.
Yeah, it becomes the water on which our boat floats.
Yeah, but there is, he kind of wants to say there is a time when it's already discovered, and it's still science. This is in the period when it's like, okay, there are people who know, but it's still something where it would be like, okay, why does the sun come up in the morning and go down at night? Well, ask a scientist. When it's still on that level, it's still in science, because part of the scientific activity is spreading it into common knowledge.
He does say that one part of science will always be facing into the vast unknown, right? Always the one edge of science will be facing back towards us, and then part into the unknown, right? And then he says that he kind of suggests that Right. I mean, this is the confusing. One of the confusing parts here is like, how far is it science? Is it? But he does seem to suggest that once we know it, it's no longer science, right? He talks about the third grade students that feed one plant some nutritious, like, I don't know, pellets, and another plant some poison, and then one of the plants dies, and he says, well, that's not science.
Yeah, or that's not the doing of science.
That's not the
like,
doing.
Yeah, because we already know it. It's not like doing the doing of science, like new science. Well, new science.
Right. I guess science is almost like for him peeling away the layer of explanation around the world that we already have. Right?
Yeah, that would be like the action of science, right?
Yes. Because he calls, for him, science isn't the body of doctrine. Of course, it couldn't be. Science is an activity. I love that. That's such an interesting way to put it. And he says, like, I love what he says. He's like, science can't be true or false. Its results can be true or false, but science itself can't be true or false. It's kind of really, I mean, like, it would be like the same thing to say, like, you know, some Christians like to say, well, science, that's just a false, heathen, I don't know, activity. But it'd be almost the same as saying, like, tennis is false. You'd be like, well, nah, tennis isn't false. I mean, tennis is just a sport that we play, right? In the same way that science is an activity that incorporates a method that gets some result, and then that result can be judged true or false, right? So science is just one activity among other activities to be done. So it is an action in his world. But again, like, it is a strange, like, how far is it science? Like, but he seems to, at least at the very least, he wants to concentrate on the prow of the boat, the very head of the boat, the very point where we don't have an explanation anymore. This thin outer shell is where we would bring in the big guns of science. And but there's also something interesting. He talks about what science is, and he says science is knowledge independent of any particular situation as possible, which is very true, right? Situational knowledge is basically, you know, like, I know to, you know, flip my pen like this in this exact situation, but science can take away all the particulars and say, I don't know why you'd want to make this a scientific project. You probably couldn't, but, you know, I'm taking away all the particulars and making the most general case possible. For example, falling objects in gravity, like you talked about earlier, Jesse, right? We're going to come up with a general rule for gravity that works in every possible situation. So what science does is it tries to burn away all the particulars, right, and gets at what sometimes scientists would call an independent state of affairs, right? In other words, a rule that works in every situation.
Yeah.
Because science, like we saw in the video too, science wouldn't be of much use if, like, a scientist came and said, "Look what I did in my laboratory. Look what I can only do in my laboratory." Right? You'd be like, "So what?" Right? Like, who cares what you can only do in your laboratory? So, we want to know what we can do all over.
Okay, so like perhaps creating stem cells.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. Her science only worked in. That's pretty funny. Her science only worked in one laboratory once, and that it was not science because it was of no general instance, general collective interest, and could not be reproduced. Yes. We are referencing a very famous fraud in Japan. They claimed that she could replicate stem cells, and she could not, but she was also very strange. Miss Obokata. I'll name her. I'll name names. I'll name scientific frauds.
Put up Japanese scientists as stem cells. You'll have it in 5 seconds. I mean, this isn't a big secret.
Yeah. So I like that. I like his image of science as an activity that's done. That is what takes a particular situation and burns away all the particulars to try to get something as general as possible. I mean, this is going to be really important for his point.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I don't know, in a strange way, I thought there's an interesting parallel here, at least, between what science does and I think what human rights tries to do, too. When we talk about what a human is, right, what these people are thinking is they take a particular human and they burn away all the stuff that's quote-unquote not particular. And then they say what's left is the human. What we have to respect is human. That's why this has a human rights. You couldn't take human rights away from somebody. It's something that's inherently a part of who they are, right? So, again, this is maybe not...
In respect of being a human.
Yeah, in respect of being a human. This is part of the essence of being a human. You can't take this away. So burn all the other anything you want away from them, you can never take this away. And this is what one of the theories of human rights has got to be, right? So, I mean, there's a kind of interesting parallel between human rights and the process of science that I thought was interesting. Anyway, so moving along into a very strange discussion of science. So in other words, now the big question in this chapter is science objective? Is scientific knowledge objective or not? And he's going to say, well, yes, it is, and it's objective for a couple different reasons. But one is because we take it to be objective. It's a kind of an activity that is taken to be objective. And I guess the meaning of that has to be something like, how can I put this well?
Its relationship to us is what we define as objective.
Objective. And that relationship would be, I guess, trying to taking that thing and looking for using every possible world you can think of. So this is where this thing about possible worlds comes up. You think of all these possible worlds, and then you see if that scientific rule stays the same in all the scientific worlds, the possible worlds you can think of, right? So you can say you burn off all these particulars, you add new particulars, you experiment around, and you see like, okay, so this rule seems to be staying staying the same for all the particulars that I can burn off. And then finally, when you put it through the grinder of possible worlds, out pops this rule, and there we go. Now we have a scientific rule. And that's basically what he's saying is the closest we're ever going to get to objectivity, right? Yeah. Is that by putting it through the ringer of everything we can think of and all the tests we can do and everyone takes a shot at the rule, everyone says no, for example, evolution, no, that's not true because this, and then someone else pops up and says no, this and this, and after all of that knowledge is combined and all of the wrong has been burned away, we finally get to something. And now, I mean, like a pure scientist would hate this. Maybe he would say, like, but that's not objective. Right? That's not really objective. But it's the best we can do, right? We burn away all the particulars until finally we get to what the most possible, quote unquote, objective thing we can get to. And this is what we call objectivity for him. Yeah. This is what objectivity is. And then he's got this really interesting discussion of hardliners and objectivity. But before we go there, please, any thoughts about my very poor summarizing of what's going on here?
Okay, though he does have some caveats that's with regard to whether or not science is objective or not. And these are kind of significant. Because he says, the pursuit of science itself is not objective because we're only looking for things we want to find. Right? And we're modeling it based on our goals for doing science. So, it's not objective in the sense that we get if I were to look up objective in the dictionary. It's more objective based on a working real world definition of objective.
Well, yeah, he does mention that science can be wrong, right? Science has a possibility of being wrong, and then he says, what I thought was interesting, he said, look, science is always going to be wrong. It's kind of funny. Science is constantly in the state of being wrong and becoming more and more correct as we burn away. Because if we had everything right already, science would stop. The funny thing about that is when we talk about miracles is we don't know when that would be. At least we will never be able to be sure when that would be. So science is never going to be in this, it's going to have to always be in the wrong. And then he says, well, you can find different reasons why we exclude certain things. For example, why did we think other races were inferior? Well, we can give a name to that. We can say it's because we were racists. And we just simply excluded evidence that would make us realize that other races were not inferior. So we can give a name to the reason why we exclude things. But it's interesting, he says, but still that process was science. Yeah. Science, even it wasn't even for him bunk science. It is science, that process. However, it simply excluded relevant data. But his comeback is, well, science always excludes data. You can't possibly incorporate everything in to your data. It's just not possible.
I mean, the key to that was more science.
Right?
Yeah, more science. This lower level kind of faulty science. The solution was more science, not something else. Right? Debunking this kind of this racist ideologies that we had at the time. I want to say I like your summary. I mean, I guess the idea here is right. Isn't it like So objectivity, in a sense, right? Objectivity is not something we start with. It's something we have to work for.
Yeah.
Right? It's a process we engage in to get, and you don't get objective. You don't become objective by somehow leaping out of your subjectivity into the objective world, whatever that would mean, right? You become objective, like you said, by a process of slowly eliminating the subjectivity you start with, and narrowing it down until you get to this really, really thin level, which is the most objective we can get, right? And this, I mean, this fits with, I mean, scientific theses are, this stuff is all like a hypothesis, right?
Yeah.
It's, I mean, the scientists know this. I hope, I'm sure they do, right? I mean, they could be wrong, right? They definitely could be wrong. They know this, but there's just it's highly unlikely that they're wrong sometimes, right? But they could. They're very hopefully they're very well aware that they could be wrong about even some of the most fundamental assumptions that they might have.
Yeah.
We just can't get there. We just can't get there yet, right? We can't leap out of this subjectivity that we have, but we can do our best to get rid of it.
I thought what was interesting.
Sorry, I don't. Actually, I'm just that's a little bit concerned here because throughout your entire very great comment there, the camera was on Dustin the whole time.
Oh, was it?
And is that just me that's not switching back and forth, or is this a?
For me, it's on you right now. But
okay. And what about for you, Justin?
Mine has been weird from the start. It's been constantly on you, Jesse.
It's been constantly on me.
Yeah, but mine's been weird from the start.
It doesn't matter though.
So
my
whatever,
camera's the only one that matters.
Exactly right.
And no, I was just kind of curious because if this was like something that was going on your side too, that now.
No, don't worry about that.
Okay, so you're cool. I just don't get to see Justin's face unless I click on him.
Yeah.
Okay. And that I can manage. Cool. Anyway, sorry.
Okay.
Okay. So, like, I just want to add one more thing about objectivity here is that it's based on Okay, I thought what was really interesting is like we saw in the video you sent us too, is that science has some fundamental assumptions about the universe. This is what allows us to be quote unquote objective, right? Science has fundamental assumptions about the universe that it can't prove. One is induction, right? I mean, this is the famous problem of induction, and how can you prove that something causes something, right? I mean, you just can't see the cause. You have to induce from the fact that you've seen a billiard ball hit another one so many times that okay, one thing is causing the next, or the past will be like the future, right? I mean, this is all just induction when it comes down to it. We just don't. There's no way to prove this. It's something we just have to kind of take for granted. I love 5.55. Science discovers the objective world. But what makes the world in science objective is the assumption that the world is there to be discovered. This is one of the fundamental assumptions science has to make. That the world is out there to be discovered, that there is an explanation for causes outside in the world.
And
again,
this is naturalism, right? I mean, this is the assumption of naturalism. I guess if you were to put it in like these kind of philosophy of science terms, this is the assumption of naturalism.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, this is a fundamental assumption of science. Everyone that's doing science has to make this assumption somewhere, otherwise the ball doesn't get rolling, right? And it's not provable though. I mean, how do you prove that? How can you ever see that all the time, right? It's just something that we have to take for granted, which is going to kind of come into this part about miracles. But so that is the assumption that allows us to make objective science. Okay, so in this sense, science is objective, right? So any thoughts? Can I go on from here? Move on. All right, good. Finally to miracles, which is interesting. So I thought this was really interesting. So after all this discussion about science and objectivity, he has a small discussion on miracles. Freaky stuff, man. So, and he says, well, miracles are possible. Miracles are just for him really unlikely things.
Which is not the definition everyone holds as a miracle, by the way.
Right. Well, he kind of says that.
Yeah.
He's like, he said, well, the only kind of miracle that is possible is one that's really, really unlikely. But anybody that believes in miracles says it has to be by this kind of inexplicable supernatural force, right? And so basically, I like what he said. He basically says, so on one hand, there's always going to be a scientist saying, well, when someone sees a miracle, there's going to be some religious person saying, God did it. You can't explain that. tides come in, tides come out. You can't explain that. And then somewhere else, there's always going to be a scientist that's going to be saying, we can't explain that yet. That there is an explanation. And between these people, between these two, no ground can be given, right? These are just two fundamental assumptions about the universe. And the scientist basically is forced into being unable to believe that miracles can exist. I mean, in the way that these people want them to think about miracles. And it's just not possible for them to do. So this argument basically can't really be solved, right? I mean, like, being a scientist almost excludes that. When they always ask Dawkins and Hitchens about, like, when they're doing these debates about God, they're like, what evidence, Professor Dawkins or Mr. Hitchens, would convince you that there is a God? And then all the time, this is interesting, they would always just sit there and sometimes they'll have kind of like, well, just show me something crazy, right? But most of the time they're like, when they get really down to it, they're like, nothing. Basically, there's nothing that you could really show me to say that God exists, because it almost would have to be, I don't know, what could you do to show that a supernatural being is doing something, right? I mean, it's almost an impossible.
What would amount to evidence of that? Like,
evidence.
Like even if there were a big, poster in the sky that appeared magically that said, God is here, repent. I mean, you can never rule out the thesis that, aliens did it.
Yeah, I mean, you could never lose the possibility of a naturalistic explanation for this whatever has happened, right? But I think the problem is that there's just no distinction between knowledge that it hasn't been explained yet and knowledge that can't be explained, right? Fundamentally, we don't know how to distinguish between those two kinds of knowledge, so we have to throw our hands up and say, well, scientists have to say, well, the world can be explained. Therefore,
or at the very least, the project they engage in would be the searching for that explanation.
Yeah.
Right. But how do you know you didn't find it? I don't know.
So I guess scientists are kind of pushed into that zone, right? They're just making fundamental assumptions about the world. Like this. So anyway, no need to harp on this anymore. Anyone have anything to say about science? I thought this section was really, really good. However, difficult to explain. So I would definitely prefer our viewer to read this on their own and really get the full force of what Fleming's up to. And here he's really done a great job about kind of summarizing science. And I have to admit, I'm pretty on board here. He's got some really, really interesting stuff about, at the end of the miracles thing, about the nature of the world and man, that I really want to talk about, but I don't know if I want to talk about here. I mean, do you want to talk about that, about the objective world and possible worlds and how man shapes the world?
Let's wait on that, actually.
Okay, yeah, let's wait.
Talk about that. Yeah.
I thought that was the most interesting part, but
me too, but yeah.
So that's very the philosophical investigation means there's a line of that going through here, which makes me wonder if that's going to be something that comes back to join us for the end of this book.
Could very well be. Could very well be. So if we're going to skip over that now, I think it's really, really great, though. And I loved that section. So please, everyone watching, read that, especially that section. I think there's a lot you could do there. And if we don't talk about it now, I'll talk about it later, definitely. I hope, anyway. So let's go to section 6. This is going to be on the nature of social systems, of conservatives and liberals. What is a conservative? What is a liberal? And what is democracy? And what's that all about? Anyone want to have a go at that?
I want to take a stab at the conservatives and liberals. Do you want to talk about democracy first, though?
Well, I just wanted to point out to our viewers, yes, this is where we're going to talk about penetration.
Oh, okay.
Yes, that's true.
I was not
coming up in 5, 4.
Also sex.
We're going to talk about sex, too. Well, okay, he does start with a little bit on democracy, but, well, let me just, shall I jump into conservatives and liberals here?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
I love the stuff on conservative and liberals. It's great.
So I have kind of something I put together. I don't know. Tell me what you think. It's far too long, but we'll see. All right. So this is kind of what I was working on the last couple of days. So in this section, Bruce Fleming puts forward the idea that conservatives express their dicta in terms of actions and liberals in terms of actors. This is 6.25. And he puts it this way in his book, his other book, the one we read before we even started videotaping this, Why Liberals and Conservatives Clash. He says in that other book, which is all about this topic, according to conservative thought, the action itself, regardless of the nature of the actors involved, is forbidden or allowed. Liberals, by contrast, express ethical dicta in terms of actors. So just to start talking about this section, let's contrast this with a widespread, quote-unquote, common-sense view of conservatives and liberals. Conservatives, it is said, want to keep things the way they were, and liberals want to change things and move forward. The first definition on dictionary.com says a conservative is disposed to preserve existing conditions, institutions, etc., or to restore traditional ones and limit change. For liberals, it says they are favorable to progress or reform, as in political or religious affairs. So
what do the conservatives use to keep things the same? Is it Kregel?
It's the Kregel.
Okay.
It's the Kregel. You did find the Kregel because, well, we have to uncraggle things sometimes.
Thank you.
In his other book, though, I like what he addresses this point in Why Liberals and Conservatives Clash. He addresses this. He says he objects to this view that it comes up short. This doesn't explain everything. He says that's because conservatives do not always support the status quo. And he gives the example of George W. Bush. So the invasion of Iraq was justified after the talk of WMDs died down. The invasion of Iraq was justified by a theory of global change. Right, the Middle East was supposed to become democratic. So this is definitely not a preservation of any kind of status quo. He also mentions the Crusade gaffe. The war on terror was not about keeping things the way they were. And let's also bring it to Japan a little bit. Abe in Japan, he's in a conservative party here. He changed the interpretation of the Constitution here to allow for the Self-Defense Force Act. This is definitely not the status quo. So maybe you think all this is lies or cover-ups for true purposes of these administrations, like the Bush administration. But whatever their true purpose is, doesn't seem to fully cash out in terms of preserving existing institutions or restoring traditional ones. Always, there's something seems to be lacking in this explanation. So Fleming's definition is an attempt to do things at an even deeper level. Conservatives don't want the status quo simply because it's the status quo, and liberals don't want change just for the sake of change. So conservatives, for Fleming, he says they postulate an action external to the actor that all must follow. They are geared to follow these kind of universal actions which the individual must conform to. So every individual has to conform to some universal action, like thou shalt not steal or something. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're born, if your family's poor, if your family's rich, you can't steal. End of story. So I want to help, or maybe it doesn't need help, but I want to just show how Fleming's ideas could be backed up by social science. The social science that's been done in politics in the last 15 years. So I dug around and I got some interesting social science studies that looked into the differences between conservatives and liberals. Here are a couple of interesting studies I found that back up this point of conservatives are geared toward action. So there's a study called Low Effort Thought Promotes Political Conservatism in a journal. And here in this study, they found that low-effort thinking promoted political conservatism. And low-effort thinking is really quick thinking. It's effortless thinking. Effortful thinking produced liberal ideologies. Another study was called Neurocognitive Correlates of Liberalism and Conservatism, and this is 2007. In this study, they found that when faced with a conflict, liberals were more likely than conservatives to alter their habitual response to when cues indicate that it's necessary. So conservatives want to stick with the same action they've always done, even if it seems like you should be changing it. And even in the article, in the study, they speculate that conservatives would probably perform better in tasks where a fixed response style is optimal. So conservatives strive for this absolute action always. They want to conform to this action always. I think it fits a little bit with what Fleming says. Another study called The Secret Lives of Liberals and Conservatives in 2008, they found that liberals were more open-minded, creative, and curious, and novelty-seeking. But conservatives were more orderly, conventional, and better organized. So they aligned themselves to these external rules more often. So, all right, what is the point of all this, though? What is all this readiness for action for? Why are they ready for action? I think this is the base level point Fleming is after. Conservatives want control. The whole point of this is to gain control. So in his other book, he says a little bit more straight. In Why Liberals and Conservatives Clash, he says, the need for control is the genesis of conservative thought. So conservatives view the world as kind of hostile and dangerous, and they take actions to control this world. What we don't control is often, but not always, passed off by conservatives onto God and put into his control, hence placing the entire world under some structure of control. And the conservative love of tradition he mentions in his other book is, for example, something that helps us control the future. If we have tradition, the future is predictable. And okay, wow, let's see if I can help him with a little more social science here too. So there's a couple really interesting studies on this. There's one called "The Left Rolls with the Good, the Right Confronts the Bad." In this study, this is in 2012, they found that right-of-center people spend more time looking at unpleasant images than those on the left. People on the left spend longer time looking at pleasant images. So they're intensely focused on these negative images. They're always watching them, or more often than liberals anyway. There's another study called "Political Orientations Are Correlated with Brain Structure in Young Adults." In this study, they found that conservatives have a larger amygdala, meaning they're more sensitive to fear. Another study called "To Provide or Protect: Motivational Bases of Political Liberalism and Conservatism," 2009, they found that liberals and conservatives differ in provide versus protect orientations. Conservatives are focused on preventing negative outcomes and regulating society via inhibition. Just two more. There's a study called "Political Leanings Vary with Facial Expression Processing and Psychosocial Functioning." In this study, they found that Republicans were more likely to interpret faces as signaling threatening expressions. They're more likely to see the outside as more threatening than a liberal. Just comparatively, interpretively, anyway. And there was another one. This came up last year. This is in a lot of blogs and people talking about this study last year, 2014, called "Differences in Negativity Bias Underlie Variations in Political Ideology." In this study, they found that conservatives have a stronger negativity bias than liberals, which means negative things upset them more than liberals. They have a larger impact on their psychology.
Also more prone to disgust. We talked about that before.
Yes, this is what I wanted to get into. Like I was wondering if we couldn't bring this in, because I wanted to bring in research on disgust by people like David Pizarro, one of the bad wizards, right, who I like very much. And he wrote an article called "Dirty Liberals: Reminders of Physical Cleanliness Influence Moral and Political Attitudes" in 2011. And these studies show that conservatives have a stronger tendency to feel disgust. And I guess disgust guards us against threats. So hence, again, trying to gain this control against a hostile outside world. So I don't know. Maybe you could take these studies in all sorts of different ways, but I think they don't conflict with what Fleming's got as far as or his ideas, right? I think they kind of lend credence to some of what he's trying to say, although maybe the individual studies might. I don't know, some of these studies might be overturned. Some of this stuff, it goes in and out, and the studies they fail to be repeated and stuff like this. But that all aside, I mean, there's quite a few studies focused on fear and readiness to action that seem to point the direction in what Fleming's talking about.
Yeah, even if you remember back to Paul Bloom's class, he talked about how when they made the room applicants were were tested in when they made the room reek of fart.
Yes.
They gave consistent, more conservative answers.
Yes. Yeah. I think that was the fart spray was that David Pizarro?
That was David Pizarro.
Oh,
Yeah.
It was David Pizarro's. It was just Bloom talking about it.
Yeah. But you know what's weird? Like, so I like that. I thought that all this is great, and I got a bunch of other stuff. Like, so here I was talking endlessly about conservatives. I don't know what to say about liberals.
Oh, damn it, that was going to be my question. Like, if conservatives are all about control, what's a liberal?
Yeah, and Fleming is not that clear about this. Is he?
Yeah, I know.
He's pretty clear about conservatives, though.
Yes, he's got a pretty firm grasp on conservatives, I think. What is a liberal about then? If it's not about control, is it boy?
It's about freedom. That's why they're called liberals.
Yes. Or like, boy, liberals are more.
I mean, if on all these studies, like I don't know, I didn't know what picture to bring together even from all these studies. Like, they're more open, according to some of these. They're more open, creative, flexible. They looked at pleasant images more. Their thinking required more effortful, deliberate reasoning. They don't react strongly to disgust as strongly as conservatives. They have more tolerance for uncertainty. Liberals have a tendency to shift their gaze in the other's direction. So if I'm standing next to you, and I look a different way, you'll follow my gaze if you're a liberal. They focus on advancing positive outcomes, and they're more likely to alter habitual responses. But what does that all amount to, especially even in the light of what Fleming is talking about? Like, don't you think Fleming is kind of, in a way, like harkening back to our last discussion about Disneyland and exotic vacations? So liberals are all about these exotic vacations, aren't they? They've got to be. Yeah. They're the ones on top of these exotic vacations, and he wants to place conservatives at Disneyland, right?
Yeah.
Right. So what does that say? What does that say? Like, what is that all about? Like, they want the kind of a freedom from responsibility. From choice? I don't know, like, if I were to take it in some weird level, like some super extreme, I don't know, but it seems all about, like, actors, right? Like, judging everything based on the actor, right? I don't know.
I mean, he gives one hint about liberals when he says conservatives are at their worst are like bulls in a china shop floating around to do anything, but liberals at their worst are like Hamlets, too afraid to take a bold stroke because they are unable to say for sure what the consequences will be. I mean, that is one of the few hints we get about a kind of, I don't know, an extreme parody of what a liberal would be. I don't know, I mean, Nietzsche mentioned the same thing, thought kills action.
Yeah.
I mean, these people are, I guess, a lot more thoughtful and or at least he's, well, it sounds so arrogant to say, but at least their frame of mind is, how about this, to incorporate possible worlds, to bring back the scientific discussion, right? They're more willing to think about possible worlds, right? In other words, I don't know, extraneous circumstances, different ways of seeing things, different ways of doing things. It seems like liberals want to break teleology, or at least the current teleology of the world. Like, they're more willing to embrace multiple purposes for things.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
Example, sex isn't only for this, and marriage isn't only this.
Yeah. So, like,
and I guess
the person doing it, right? The person
doing it. Right? I mean, like,
say how
the ultimate, maybe the ultimate end of a liberal, in a strange way, would be the self, the ego. Like, you are the pinnacle of the universe, right? It says that the conservatives can be running cross purposes to the universe, right? The universe says this is the way it should be, and you can be doing that or not doing that. But for a liberal, just like, remember Max Stirner too, he talks about this a little bit. Basically, it's impossible for you not to be a man. A conservative can say to you, "Come on, man up, baby."
Yeah.
You are not being a man. Stand up for yourself. Do this, do that. A liberal couldn't say that. A liberal has to say, "Come on, man, you're a man." you already are a man. What you can do anything you like, right?
Yeah.
A liberal's ultimate end has got to be. This is gonna sound. Oh God, I hate saying that. Like the self.
Yeah. I mean, we're of course taking extremes, right? Like
Yeah.
absolute extremes. Like what would be the just if you pushed it just an absurdly to the end of the scale, where would it go, right? I guess. I mean, on Fleming's system, I guess. Like you would be free to do whatever you like.
I mean, what do you think about this? I mean, this is going to be another just extreme kind of stereotype. But anyway, we're going to talk about men and women and conservatives and liberals. But what if I were to say this? That because men are in general in power, or conservatives, not all men though. Women can be in power too, in a certain sense, right? A part of the ruling class or whatever, right? I mean, like they don't need to contemplate any other external circumstances, right? And in fact, if anything, they kind of like to make the world the way that it is, serving their interests, right? I don't know, via whatever rules that they've decided the universe should be, right? Not to take it back to your, like, conservatives want to keep the structure of the universe the same. That's not true. But isn't the fact that, and this again, I don't tell me if I'm wrong here, conservatives are out of power, that they initially don't have power, is what is able to open themselves up to the externalities of the universe, right? To be able to see other possibilities comes from the fact that when you're not in charge and someone's telling you from above, this is what you do and this is why you do it, you're able to say no, or at least you feel no faster. You're more able to jump into this rebellious kind of form. It seems like liberals, at least it would be easier to be a liberal when you're out of power.
Well, yeah, there seems to be something like conservatives, to an extent, they genuinely almost care. They don't care about person A, person B, so they care about everyone. That's why they have to, as Fleming said, they focus on actions. It's like, okay, this action has made, engaging this action, engaging in this path, has made me wealthy, happy, powerful, etc., etc. So therefore, this should be the rule for everyone, so they can all reap the benefits of this. Whereas, liberals, they don't necessarily have that scope of maybe it's this is the trade-off for an act towards you're not able to focus on everyone, which is kind of what the conservative tries to do.
We also need to consider why it is that conservatives have this kind of unholy alliance, if you will, between the most powerful and the least powerful people.
Yeah.
Like the super billionaires and the salt of the earth, kind of very poor, in America's instance, white conservatives that don't have a dime to their name, and yet these people are willing to die for rich corporations. I mean, like, maybe a bit of liberalism also requires you can't be dirt poor and sitting there thinking about all these different kind of new ways of looking at the world either, right?
Well, maybe that's your thing. The people who are dirt poor they're just thinking, okay, I need to get me my next sandwich for lunch.
Yeah.
There's no time.
I don't have time to figure out another. If I sat down and thought about how to get 2 sandwiches for lunch tomorrow, I might not get a sandwich for lunch today.
Yeah.
I mean, they would also kind of correlate with, I don't know, an increase in their economic conditions would lead to a more liberal stance, possibly, from them in a strange way.
Well, liberalism runs rampant in institutions of higher education.
Yeah.
Which, if you're going to college, you at least got some financial stability.
Yeah. Yeah, like, does that mean, like, I don't know, because Fleming does mention this, sometimes he mentions, like, how is it the fact that like, because I'm sure like Fleming straight up says like science it bends more toward the liberal endgame than he places what belief in the conservative one and science in the liberal one, in the sense that like the liberal is considering like this extra personal structure, right, beyond the individual. It's outside of your own actions per se. Like there's this extra personal structure that's
right. The ethics is situational.
Right. Yeah.
For
Yeah.
liberal.
Yeah.
Liberal has a situational ethics, whereas the conservative does not. Like it's always thou shalt something something, which is like a command from outside the universe almost.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
God's command. This is the way the world is. I don't know. What does that say about what a liberal is? I am really clueless. I mean, you get this great picture of what a conservative is in here.
Yeah.
But what is a liberal? Wow. I mean,
you might. Maybe the only way you can say this is that liberals can only exist in relation to conservatives. I mean, it would be insane to, well, it might be insane. I need to think this through more, a little bit more before I make a definitive statement, but it might be insane to try and think of a world where everybody was liberal.
It might be more difficult at any rate.
Right.
It seems like the conservative structure is what almost prompts this kind of frustration inside of it. I don't know. I mean, he doesn't say this, but I'd like to believe that, and I have no evidence to do that either, by the way. So, but it just feels like, I don't know. I mean, he talks about how men. Right, let's move it on to the men and women and sex now. Men are more inclined to have that thought. Is to believe in the action viewpoint, right? Conservatism and men seem to line up, according to him.
Or at least control.
Control.
I think he lines up control with the kind of men, right?
Action, right?
Action.
Men control, and
that's where they overlap, right? This
like
control.
The male world kind of ends up kind of being more inclined to be conservative because it tends towards action and control, being able to control the things around them, right? Where do you think this? I mean, like, does this desire for control? What is this? I mean, is this an inherent thing, or where does this come from? Where does this come from having power? Right? I mean, when you have power, you want to keep it, right? By some methods, or organize what's underneath you.
Is it that, or is it the fact that you see yourself under attack? Right.
Okay.
You see yourself as consistently being threatened.
I was actually flashing on this guy a little bit. Because this guy, he tells us, basically what he says is forget about things that aren't under your control. That kind of seems like maybe though he, of course, does everything, and for him was kind of about action, but though of course it wasn't accomplishing. Getting off that, he said don't focus on things that you can't control. And it seems like maybe the reverse side of that is the conservative view. They realize that everything's spinning out of their control, like you said, Justin. And conservatives tend to have higher disgust factors, higher fear factors. So maybe in this world it feels out of their control. It's like they have to latch onto something and say, okay, don't change.
Yeah.
Don't change.
Yeah. This part I can keep predictable. This part will not surprise me. This part will not assault me. This part I can do, right, without worry.
What if I was going to try to be a little bit of a devil's advocate here? Why not? And say, well, I mean, like, yeah, I guess you're right. Like, I like what both of you said, like, especially like Epictetus, and also how that relates to being under attack, right? And men, you say, like, you don't want to, you feel like you're under attack, and also but the world can't exist without action, right? I mean, the action has to come first, right? The actor, right? I mean, like, somebody went on the world and acted, and perhaps even said, and this is good. What I do, I am good, I am the beautiful, I am the strong. Look at me. And then everyone kind of moves towards that, right? And so, I don't know if this is this complete kind of focus on like these people are scared. I think a lot of conservatives are afraid, and they're afraid of the world falling apart. But there's also, I don't know, I want to say that like there's the initial spark in there is not fear, right? I mean, you can't just go into the world and say like, what do I do? How do I act, right? I mean, you can't just ponder in the forest about, well, should I eat this berry or that berry? Let me ponder the consequences of berry eating. Is it bad for our people or good? Right? Like, no, you go and get the berry, and that's it. I mean, the initial, I mean, the way the world is, you have to act first, and then whatever liberalism is, it has to flower on top of that, right? I mean, it's got to be a flowering that occurs because of I don't know, whatever time we're given to be thoughtful. Right, but in the beginning, it's got to be the act. The animal nature of ourselves is the act, right? So I don't know. I mean, I feel like I don't know. I just don't want to sell conservatives too short because I don't want to just bash on them because
definitely.
I'm one.
Yeah, and on top of that, like I guess there's got to be something in there to what you're saying because if it's just fear, like I mean, people who are deathly afraid could just curl up in a ball.
Yeah.
Right. I mean. If you're deathly afraid, you're not going to do anything. You gotta feel at least some. You have to have some notion of the fact that you can get out there and act. You have to believe that you can get it done at least. I hope.
But I mean, to act, you have to have. I mean, I guess not everyone is strong enough to be God. To say, look at me, I am the good. Right. I mean, it's so hard to do. So to act, you have to be able to point to something and say this. This is why I act. This is why I'm a soldier. This is why I sacrifice. It's for this. You need that like intermittent something to support your actions, to prop you up, because you might be too afraid to take on the responsibility of that action, or you can't think of it on your own. It's impossible to do on your own, maybe for some people, right? They're just not strong enough to say, "Look at me, I'm so awesome. Therefore, do what I do." Right? They need something a road sign, a post along the way, and I don't know. I mean, maybe even for the people that are poorer conservatives, I mean, they need that maybe more than ever. They need somebody to tell them how and what to act, and they don't have time to be thinking about it. I don't know. Just a thought.
I like that. It's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, I just don't want to. I just hate bashing on conservatives because all of us are obviously on the liberal side. It's obvious. It's so much obvious because we can't define what a liberal is. And that's what makes
exactly. I know that was the scary point for me.
This is comic because obviously we're liberal because we can look at the conservative and say they're non-thinking, they're afraid, and they're trying to control the world, but we can't take this kind of cold, objective look at ourselves. Right? I don't know. I don't like that. I don't like that.
That's what freaked me out too. It did seem just rather comic, the fact that like we can't see the water we're swimming in, right? We're the fish, right? I mean, Fleming is too. Fleming is a liberal in a conservative institution, right? In his naval academy, right?
Isn't this why we need both people? He says we need both. I mean, like, can one function without the other? I don't know. We end up being either proto-fascists without liberals, or I don't know, Hamlets. Like he says, without conservatives, right? I mean, just like democracy, he suggests that we need both.
He does, yeah.
That they're both necessary for the thing to work.
It was weird. I was trying to incorporate Jonathan Haidt into this too, like Jonathan Haidt's
his five
foundations, the 5 foundations. And I don't know. I in the end I didn't. I wasn't sure where to stick him in, but like Haidt even said, like after he wrote his book, he said like he came to a more middle ground position. He started to see the usefulness of both sides. I don't know. Well, in the future, I do want to get around to reading Haidt's book for our book club here. But I thought it was interesting too that Haidt kind of seems to see the necessity of both after studying this quite a bit too.
Yeah, I mean, granted, I still can't bring myself to agree with the conservative love of disgust, and I don't know, like, so much of me rebels against the conservative mindset that...
Yeah.
Well... So, shall we move on from there? I mean, leaving nothing standing, even hopefully, I just want to throw out some ideas. Don't take me as, like, I'm a proto-conservative. I don't know. It's hard to just. I think there is some fear there, though. And Nietzsche said everyone is basically afraid. That's maybe more true than you'd like to believe.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah, definitely.
So at the end of this, he talks about conservatives and liberals, and then he gets into talks about sex.
Yes.
Let's talk about sex.
He talks about sex for a long time. He talks about sex because it's problematic, right? He likes it. He likes this area because it causes so many problems. Because it's what he says. It's not in the social realm exactly. It's not in the personal realm exactly. It kind of floats between the two.
Yeah, I kind of when I was first of all, he kind of mentions this earlier when he says things that we don't care about things that are just completely unrelated to our projects. I see this as art. It has to be close enough that we can relate to it, and yet not completely alien. So there's kind of that vibe going on. It also reminded me of from our horror discussions, the uncanny.
Interesting.
I mean, sex makes us uncomfortable because it's in this weird in-between realm. It makes it hard for us to completely classify. If we can completely classify it, then we can completely codify it in a manner that it's no longer an issue. But the fact that it's in this weird in-between area just makes it get uneasy.
I like that a lot. I mean, what I thought of was Plato. I don't know why this is going to sound bizarre.
Oh, boy. Did you think of a cave or something?
No. I was thinking about Plato's feeling of threat about the private. I remember Plato is in his downfall of the Republic, when it goes further and further, the private spaces get larger and larger. And the one thing his guardian class couldn't do was have a private space.
Yeah.
And he basically controlled all of their sexual actions, right to the point of eugenics. He chose people to have sex with this person. He wouldn't even allow the privacy of sex at all. It was too much of a private, dangerous space for him.
And on top of that, like, now that you mention that, Eros is what took down the Republic when they screwed up the marriage number.
Yeah.
Right? So it was, I guess somebody had sex on the wrong day or something? I don't know. But anyway, Eros took down Callipolis. Right? So it's true.
And these dangerous, like you said, Jesse, uncanny or almost horrific personal spaces that we don't know what to do with, that are potentially dangerous. I mean, some of my favorite thinkers and even movies kind of talk about the danger that is love. I mean, how wild and crazy and its effects are not always happy and flowers and bunnies, and it's quite a dangerous thing sometimes, even between two people, or the effects it can have on other things. Do we move on to the weirder part of this, though?
When you get into, like, pornography?
Yeah, this is another thing that's between two worlds, right? Pornography.
Pornography is, he locates it even in the more irritating zone, didn't he say? Because it's a little bit more public. Not totally, though. It's still in the in-between, right? I kind of like his talk of, like, this in-between stuff in the sense that, like, there's no set way one interacts with pornography. You know what I mean? Like, you could come at it at a bunch of different ways. We're not quite sure how you're approaching. Wow, that's what he said. Okay, anyway. Oh boy, you could make jokes about it. You're not quite sure. Like, people could approach it in, like, a myriad of different ways. Like, he even says, I just like that section. I'm not sure, how much you can really press this point, like, totally, but where he talks about how in sex, like, after a while, your relationship becomes so unique with that person you're having sex with, it becomes sui generis, right? It becomes almost unique to the two of you. You develop a very intimate personal relationship that can't be changed out for another one. So it's in this weird individual realm that there are no codified rules to describe, like the way we approach art, and like in the same way that there's no set way to approach art, there's no set way to approach pornography. I think this is where he's going with this, right? I kind of I thought it was kind of interesting too, like just in this, just a little bit some more support to this private social distinction. Roger Scruton, remember Roger Scruton, right? Like he wrote a book on sex, and in his book on sex, like he talks about he doesn't like masturbation, or he says masturbation is obscene. And his argument that masturbation is obscene is interesting. It really rides straight at, maybe Fleming read him, I don't know, but it really rides straight across Fleming's zone, right? Because he's like, masturbation is obscene because you can't do it in public without it being obscene, right? Which is a really odd argument, I think, in the first place. I mean, because he just made sex between a man and a woman obscene, potentially. But maybe he wouldn't have. I don't know. What do you? He seemed to be against masturbation for some reason, especially more than like between married couples. But I don't know. That's the problem for Roger Scruton. I'm just saying this psychology seems to be here somewhere.
I can kind of see, because even with there are social situations in which that sex could not be obscene. Social situations, of course, being interaction with your partner. But any time masturbation touches the social realm, even if in certain very limited situations, classrooms mainly, you can talk about masturbation without being obscene. You can also, when talking about philosophy, you can also talk about masturbation without being obscene. But if we're at a party, for example, and I all of a sudden start talking about masturbation, and everyone will say,
again?
Yeah, Jesse,
again with the masturbation.
Yeah, but yeah, they would, it would be I'd be making an obscene comment, an obscene joke.
Yeah. So like when Shinji did it, right? That was disgusting.
Yeah. I love that scene in the Evangelion movie though.
When Shinji did it with Asuka, that was wow.
Yeah, we got to watch.
So I mean, like, I know. Let's take it to dangerous areas. Why not? I mean, basically, he's doing what you did in your video before. But I mean, he's basically saying that you can't link pornography with anything directly.
Yeah.
It's impossible to link watching pornography with X, right?
Yeah.
It's never going to be the same. It's like he compares it to reading Madame Bovary, right? Is that linked to? Does it encourage women to be adulteresses or not? We don't know because it's never going to have that exact link. All right, let's just the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Anita Sarkeesian, she says that video games link directly to, she seems to suggest sometimes.
Exactly, yeah.
Link directly to sexism. And you know what? I think Bruce Fleming's going to, if you were here, you'd say no. At least you can't have it as clear, black and white, as you seemingly portray it as. And I know people are like, well, it contributes to a worldview. But that's not what she says.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if it were something more along those lines, because that's actually the position I like. You know what I mean? Like, as I was reading this, I was thinking, like, let's just take Bruce Fleming's definitions of conservatism and liberalism, and just take a question that pops up again and again and again, or at least when I'm looking at this stuff. So people say stuff like, I think some people have a problem with Anita when they say things like this. They say, well, Anita, come on, is having sexy women in games okay or not? Give me the definitive answer. Yes or no, forbidden or allowed, right? And I think Fleming would kind of jump back and say, well, that's a kind of conservative question now, isn't it? The liberal response would be, well, it depends. How are you coming at this? Like, in what way is the individual approaching this, right? Like, it could be good, it could be bad. It depends on who's doing it. But then these other people are like, that's not what I'm asking. This is eternal revolution. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking because if it's okay, then it should always be okay. And if it's not okay, it should never be okay. And you know what? Freedom of speech. Tell me that, Anita. Is freedom of speech okay or never okay? Because if it's okay, it's always okay. And if it's not okay, it's never okay, right? This, right? Like, I kind of, you can feel echoes of what Fleming is talking about in this conversation, right? And I kind of think, Anita, if she answered, like the way she talks, you're right. She's kind of like this. She almost talks like this. This produces this effect when she.
Isn't what she's doing is also echoing in the book is that one of her problems is that she's carrying the ethical realm into what these people feel are private spaces.
Exactly. Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, this is exactly in my video. This is what Jordan Owen was going off on. It's perfectly morally okay for me to have a fantasy in my mind, right? Like that. I love that. But this is kind of what he's going off about there, right? I mean, you get it. You can feel that, right? I know what he's talking about. It's this point, right? It's the private realm.
Right, and both of them, it's kind of interesting that both sides are feeling all the problematic aspects of this. Her, because, at the problematic kind of gender disparity that appears, and for conservatives, the problem of, like, well, this is the private world, don't bring your ethics into my private world. Well, how far does that go, and how far can that go? I mean, all that is here, right? Although, I still think that she, I mean, like if her argument isn't... I mean, like, I don't know. Like, we can talk about this at a different time, but she seems to want to link games to real-life effects. Okay, and then you can say, well, that's linked through a worldview that it supports. Okay, but even that requires evidence, right? So, I mean, like, we're kind of at an impasse here. Like, and then, for example, like you said in your video, well, how far can we let people have these kind of play zones and not, right? And, like... You're right, and then it's going to have to come down to, like, you have to make a zone where it's okay to have fantasies, and then outside of that, you have to somehow, I don't know, you have to have effortful thinking, maybe.
Exactly right. Yeah, I mean,
you have to engage in effortful thinking to stop that fantasy from changing your worldview.
Maybe that might be my video. It just boils down to kind of like what Fleming would say that the liberal would do. He would say, like, the individual is free as long as the individual approaches it in a certain way. It all depends on how the individual approaches it, not whether the action itself is okay, right? Yeah. So, if you've got this buffer of criticism, this buffer of feminism, this buffer of critical thinking, if you've got all these buffers, maybe you can approach it in a different way. And instead of asking the question, is it okay to have, naked sexy sexy women in our games or whatever, right? It would be more fruitful to approach it from, like, how do people approach these games? What is
Why isn't this being more directly said? This is, I mean, like, I don't know. I don't think that we're like kings of philosophy over here, but I do think we have a pretty good take on this. Why isn't this perspective being more? Maybe it is. I don't know. Being more.
I don't know. It's a tough perspective to even bring to the table. I mean, what do you do with that? Like, it's just like, how do you know how each individual is reacting to these things? First of all, and like, I don't know. What if somebody like Jordan Owen walked along and said, "Well, it's not what I think." Okay.
Yeah.
I mean. I guess
Jordan Owen might even say it doesn't matter. He says, I don't care. He might even just say, I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter what they think, because we already have the laws in place to stop whatever bad effects there are. And story.
Yeah, it's been sufficiently buffered or whatever.
That would be like the shortened version of a 2-hour video of his, right? Like, two sentences, right?
You have to sit through like an hour and a half to get to those 2 sentences, though. Yeah. I mean, yeah,
I mean, he might say that. I'm not defending. I'm just saying he might just say that. But then I think these people are on the conservative side, right? They see only action, and they don't see it as part of participating in some kind of larger narrative, right?
I mean, I guess the problem is, like, just maybe it's some of this overreaction that's worrying.
Yeah.
Right. That's some of the worrying aspect, and when it's kind of like, this real, like, screaming.
Yeah.
That's the worrying part, rather than being like, oh, okay, and then going back to playing Dead or Alive beach volleyball.
Right. But then again, that changes it, right? I mean, then now the argument, like we said, we've already said this, right? Like, that the story becomes the reaction and not the arguments. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is the funny, ironic thing that's happened.
So this seems to play into what we're saying about FIFA, especially with gamer, because we have long been a persecuted group. And just as not in this country, but and over there where Anita's actually making her call, and gamers are just finally able to kind of have pride in their profession, and we do, I can imagine. I've had to kind of marry myself to how I'm seen here about it, and I imagine you feel a little bit scared if somebody's coming here and saying there's problematic elements of your hobby when it's finally just now being accepted.
Yeah.
So they're probably, this is again the Klingon saying, don't change, don't change. I mean,
yeah. I mean, you feel under assault, right? You feel there's the weight of this constant assault that you've grown up with too. Like, oh, games are stupid. They're man baby toys. They're waste of time. Right? Yeah.
And so what kind of interests me is everybody saying, oh, she's trying to change video games, which yes, she is. That's I think that's undeniable. Well, but the question nobody asked the question is there a need to change video games? I mean, maybe a movie Bob, he's saying yes, as it needs to become a more refined art style.
But isn't the funny thing? I don't mean to make this an Anita video, but Movie Bob and even Jim seem to be well, we're on her side, but there's such strange, different reasons. Movie Bob almost seems obsessed with making video games better.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a bad thing. He wants to make the games themselves better, and he says well, I don't want your stupid summer blockbuster story in my great game. I want thick, interesting, complicated characters that are, pattern breaking and really interesting and deep. It seems like that's the thrust behind what he's saying sometimes, as opposed to these kind of pseudo sociological arguments that she's linking to studies about aggression, which we don't know what that means. This amplifies aggression in this, and okay, well, there's other studies that say it doesn't, right? He doesn't even bother with that. He's like, these are stupid. This game is stupid. It tells a stupid story. The character is thin. It's a stereotype. Get it out of here. That's why I like his arguments much better, because they're kind of he's kind of got an attitude of let's make games better. He doesn't need this kind of BS linked on the side, right, that he can't prove or disprove. I mean, this is where she's struggling. She's wading through the mud when she doesn't have to. In some of these arguments, again, this is science, right? Part of what she's saying is facing the realm of the unknown. How it's going to be a tough battle to fight this. Well, it's conclusively shown the games cause aggression, which she mentioned, right? She links to these things, right? Okay, well, what does aggression mean? Is aggression a bad thing? Again, if you're taking a liberal standpoint, no. But aggression isn't always a bad thing. Aggression can be good, and anger can be good too.
Yeah, well, even aggression, ambition and aggression are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. I mean, wow, this is getting far too Anita-centered. Even if she were to talk about things like, how can we make a more welcoming atmosphere, or what kind of games could be created to be more welcoming? I mean, those are really interesting. That would be fine. That would be really interesting topics for her to bring up. Why
does she need to rely on this pseudoscience all the time, where Fleming just so casually casts it off in 3 sentences? He's like, well, there's no proof. Bam. It's gone.
Well, I don't know if I'd go too far to call it pseudoscience, but I would say it's inconclusive. It's highly inconclusive.
Okay, right. It's not pseudoscience.
If we're talking strict definitions, it's not pseudoscience. It's real science.
The science they're doing is pseudoscience, but whatever she's saying, if she says that there's a direct link when there isn't one, maybe that's not what she's saying, but then it becomes kind of, yes, it increases aggression, therefore video games make you aggressive. Well, that's not what not what it said. That's not even science being done there.
Exactly. There you go. That would be a better point. What do you do with these conclusions? It's totally unclear what these conclusions lead to. How are we to interpret the conclusions of all this data? It is done by real science. Yeah. But
but that's a question for science.
Exactly. How are we to interpret the results, right? And that's what we don't know. We don't know how to interpret these results.
Yeah. She could fight her battles on such clear grounds, for example, a welcoming atmosphere. The reaction she's got, the letters and the emails and all that, she can fight on those grounds, but she is more and more all the time, because that's the only clear ground she's got.
And,
Right.
I mean, yeah, she could have kept plowing the road with these tropes and rather than pulling out these studies and saying, what was it, that people looking at sexy avatars made them care less about the well-being of women.
Was there more accepting of rape stereotypes or something like that?
There was. She also said
one like that too, right?
there's that.
Yeah.
Cares less about their well-being.
Yeah. That was in there too. Yeah.
But she could have just said, "Listen, come on, guys. I mean, yeah, I understand you like this, but we need something more here. If you want women, to join you, it can't all be Kratos shoving the Princess of Poseidon's castle into the gears to keep the door open.
Yeah.
It can't all be this.
Yeah. And I from a snobbish viewpoint, I can totally say, yeah, right. This is stupid, right? I mean, it's just child. I mean, if you have that vantage point, you can say this is childish. It's a stereotype. It's a trope. We've seen this a million times. Get over it and tell some interesting stories like Movie Bob does. I get that. I totally get that.
Yeah.
Of course, we could throw back the point. I mean, okay, stories are just an excuse. Back to conservatism. Stories are an excuse to motivate action.
Yeah. Right. But we gotta stop.
Yeah.
This is not an Anita video.
This is not an Anita video. This is the first Fleming video.
Let's move on to penetration.
There we go.
Penetration and abortion too. Let's talk about penetration and abortion and all these other things. Anyone wants to talk about it? I thought the abortion thing was actually really, really interesting, but and also pseudo evolutionary arguments for X, right? Anything you want to say? I really like his commentary on the evolutionary arguments and the fallacy of kind of evolutionary arguments.
Yeah, I mean, if that's what they're doing, I mean, if this is where it gets tricky. I mean, not all these guys are doing this. Not all these evolutionary psychologists are doing this. But if your whole argument is that's the way the cavemen did it, so we have to do it too. I mean, you're obviously committing a fallacy, right? You're just trying to justify status quo or an ancient status quo, right?
Well,
it doesn't mean
you're subjectively looking back at actions you want to justify. Thunderfoot. He loves putting up that stupid comic that says, on one side it's scientific method. Here's the facts. What does it suggest? And then creationist methods. Here's the facts. Where's the evidence for it?
Yeah.
And this is kind of what's going on here.
They've kind of started with their conclusions.
Yeah, I like how he almost primes for this. It's I really like what he's doing in his book, because as he talks about this with children and parents and DNA.
Yeah. We went to the DNA, right? Yeah.
It's echoing. It's like stanzas.
Yes.
They rhyme.
Yes, rhymes.
You're not complimenting this book. I mean, I think what he's really talking about, maybe not so much about these evolutionary psychologists, is a lot of conservatives that basically say cavemen did X, we are still alive, conclusion X helped keep us alive.
Yeah.
This is the way we've been doing it since my grandpappy's days. And I don't see no reason to change now. It's kind of like your stereotypical conservative.
Yeah. Or as he suggests, even something in the most cases, he says cavemen didn't do Y, they did X. We survived in the past, therefore it's dangerous to do Y and not X, right? For example, liberals or conservatives are often say there ain't been no civilization with gay marriage. All those were destroyed.
The Roman Empire fell when the gays got married, right? Or whatever, right? Yeah, when they accepted the gays, yeah.
Ain't no civilization like that before, right? Well, yeah, thank you for that bit of wisdom, sir. Again, the fallacy of this argument is incredible, but it's just I don't know. It's just really interesting because I don't know. It's easy for this argument to seep in because it's pseudoscientific. I don't know. I worry because there's tons of reasons to reject this, not for even the obvious ones. For example, I mean, like, why do we take evolution as any kind of good at all? I mean, evolution was simply a tactical survival strategy for your environmental survival strategy. That's it. And all it was kind of changes to adapt to different changes in the environment. So why is that always a good thing, right? I mean, there's no evidence at all that that's a good thing. For the first part, why would we want to do that? We don't know. What if evolution said, well, now you're all going to be slugs, like Tom Paris became.
After going past warp 10,
after going past warp 10, he became a slug. Well, we could very well become slugs a billion trillion years in the future or something, right? It's possible we could evolve into slugs, just brainless slugs. Why wouldn't that be possible? And evolution wouldn't care. Evolution's not trying to make smart people, beautiful people. Well, I mean, you can argue for beauty, but I mean, it's not trying to make smart people or good people. That's not what it's doing at all. And then the next premise that I thought was funny here was, we are still alive, therefore X helped keep us alive, right? Well, evolution didn't help keep everyone alive, right? There are species that have gone extinct, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so obviously evolution is not this fix-it key, right? I mean, it's not as if, we have evolution, therefore we're going to live forever.
Yeah.
I mean, just look at all the species that have died off in the past, right? I mean, we're going to end up being like the dwarves in Helm's Deep or something, right? We're all going to die one day. Who knows what could happen in the future? I mean, or all these other animals that died in the past. I mean, there's no guarantee of survival even with evolution. So, again, evolution gets thrown under the bus here. Well, why do we have to only rely on this? I mean, sometimes it's helpful, but why do we have to?
And even when you think about this bioevolutionary, the augmentation, and the cavemen did it, that is counter-evolutionary. I mean, evolution is of changing and, adapting.
Yeah. Right. What if our environment has changed so much, and it has changed, that, for example, doing what a caveman did would be counter-evolution? I mean, we'd die off if we did it like that again, because we are the species that has changed our environment.
Like maybe the cavemen were sitting around saying, well, the field men did it 10,000 years ago. And look where we are. We got in our cave finally.
Yeah, well, you can even imagine, this could be, let's go back to Yonimo, right? The most recent Yonimo. Yonimo Kimyonaboke. Monogatari. Sorry, I'm mixing up Jojo here. Yonimo Kimyo no Monogatari. The Twilight-ish Japanese show. Twilight Zone-ish Japanese show. Check it out. In the most recent episode, they had a story where the Ochi was is that humanity was no longer able to reproduce, and there's pollutants, and people had to walk outside with the Ochi, the twist. This was this, and they had to walk outside with gas masks. Now you can imagine, Jin, in this world, how crazy it would be if conservatives were to say, hey, well, the cavemen didn't wear no gas masks when they left their caves.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Then we wouldn't be able to make the wonderful robots that, I'm sorry. Listen to no more. Watch the episode. If it's possible to watch the episode. Maybe it's on YouTube illegally. But it's just, to put it briefly, too long didn't listen. Evolution is a very difficult thing to argue from or for. I mean, not even just for the obvious reasons that it's just logically doesn't make any sense. But I mean, even if it did, why? Right? I mean, what are we taking? Why are we bowing to evolution? There's no reason to do that, and you really get to know that if you study anything about the body or science or even colors, like we studied recently. When you really learn that you're not seeing the world as it really is, and evolution doesn't care that you're seeing the world as it is. It's not leading towards truth or anything. It's just helping you survive, and that's it. That's all it wants to do is survive. So it's not exactly this fix-it tool. So be careful, people. So now let's talk about being heterosexual, because I know I am. So
no, I am too. Well, okay.
Who here is not heterosexual? Better get out.
Yeah, I feel so at ease now.
I know I'm a cisgendered white male, so get out, everybody that's not. Yeah.
You're making me very nervous.
I love this beginning of the being heterosexual thing, though. I loved it. 0.87. So great. Men tend to care more than women do whether other men are heterosexual. I totally get it. And he says it's because men define themselves not in respect to women. They define themselves in respect to other men and the choices that they make, right? The object choices that they don't make, right?
Yeah.
I was like, wow, I love that. It's so neat.
And also, I was kind of, this one too, though one of the reasons a lot of people feel uncomfortable, with homosexuals. I assume none of us do, but it's because they do lie again in this weird middle realm, where they're closer to us, closer to heterosexual men than women, but not as alien women.
It opens up the possibility of
ambiguity.
Right, the possibility of having a face hugger.
Yes.
Let's make it aliens metaphors.
Yeah, the possibility that basically you could be conceived as a sexual being, right, or being penetrated, or whatever you want to say, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that what you're saying, Jesse?
Well, I was even then not going that far. I mean, well, now when you deal with other men, and when heterosexual men deal with other heterosexual men, and there's we make an assumption, and that we're on some fundamental level, we're similar.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the axiom of relationships between heterosexual men. But when you're sitting there with your gay friend, and you're swapping stories. It's college. Everybody's out drinking at the bar, and people are talking about their exploits with women, and all of a sudden your friend there who he's gay, you kind of understand on a cognitive level that he's doing things different than you are, but all of a sudden amidst of this discussion he says, the other night I was sucking this guy's cock. All of a sudden it's kind of like, whoa, okay, this fundamental level that I thought we were all connected on there's a little bit of a rift in here, and it's.
Yeah, I would like. Isn't the whole problem here exactly that? Is that sex is linked with power, and
that's what this section's all about.
Power, because in other words, to be taking it or sucking cock or whatever, to be a bottom, is to be of lower power.
Yeah,
you are lesser in a certain way because of that.
Yeah,
and that's why I like his sex. Basically, he says people they just make this map of the world, of power map, and then they place certain people at certain levels, and the people that fall in this sector of the power map, these are sexually available people.
Yeah.
Less powerful, generally females, right? And then all of a sudden when people start going outside the power map over here, right? Then it starts opening up the map to crazy places, and that's uncomfortable. But it's interesting, I don't know. I think this is going to be my revolution against cisgendered everything, man. But
take down the system.
Take down the system. I really kind of like this in a certain sense. I don't know if I'm going to go the whole way with this sex is power thing, but there is a lot to be said here in the sense that I don't think that anybody is 100% straight or gay. I think there's this vast, and you can see this with all the people that are calling themselves whatever gendered, agendered, something gendered, whatever, and they have different pronouns for themselves, right? But all that means is there's this vast kind of zone of sexuality, right? And like that. And the reason we know that is because sometimes even heterosexual men can see other heterosexual men as available if they see them in a feminine enough appearance or a situation. They know that they can dominate them, right? For example, the quote-unquote lady boys of Thailand, right? People like this, right? And heterosexual men like this, right? and then people say, well, no, they're actually gay. Right. Well, I don't know. Maybe it's simply because they see them now as opened up underneath them. They're lesser power. They have enough. They're still dominant over them, so it's okay for them to kind of engage in another level of sexuality. Right. Mm-hmm. I think that's a much more interesting theory than there's just gay and straight, and that's it. There's no more to it. Right. I think that there's power. There's people that are kind of working it out via power levels, like Dragon Ball.
So you put on your scouter and then
Yeah, like, okay, lesser power than me, sexual object right here.
wow.
So basically, you can say the show
No,
was
no.
based on his bitch.
Yeah, but basically.
Yes, but
Wow.
I know,
Majin Buu.
I was thinking about. Oh, and that's why Majin Buu was. Of course, he was enveloping people. Anyways, let's get off of Dragon Ball and sex. Just go to the internet. You can find as much as you want, people. Well, you don't need to hear from us. But anyways, I was looking at the magazine rack. I love going to convenience stores.
Sorry. Speaking of pornography.
Yeah, well.
Oh, you're going there.
This
Oh,
isn't
wow.
going there.
Oh, wow. You are going there. Awesome.
No, this is not going there.
Oh.
No, I was looking at the magazine rack in the convenience store because it's a good way to one glance keep up on like who's cool and who's not. And I noticed as well. First of all, viewers, Playboy in Japan is a lot different than Playboy in America.
Mm.
A lot. It's a lot more articles. They have manga in there.
I'm not sure they're owned by Playboy, really, are they? I think they're a separate company.
Yeah. Well, possibly. They still have the Playboy bunny.
Yeah, it's still the logo,
Yeah,
but it's
still the
different.
logos. There is kind of a nudes section in the middle. You can kind of have to like pull these two pages.
I wouldn't know.
They're pages that are stuck together. You have to pull off to see the nudity. But anyways, is the most recent issue of Weekly Playboy has a gravia, a bikini gravia of Sato Kayo.
Sato Kayo. I don't know.
No,
Who is this?
Wait, you guys don't know Sato Kayo? Come on.
No, who's
Sato
that?
Kayo is,
Kayo.
I guess you would call her a. I'm sorry, I'm not up on the lingo's gotten so complicated. Please, anyway, forgive me if I don't use the right word. I think you might call her a transgendered woman. And
Really?
basically,
Oh, wow.
it's a man who has had no a biologically man who has had no operations and sees himself as a woman and is actually a female model.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I found this very interesting that Sato Kayo is modeling in a bikini in Playboy.
Yeah, that's it. That's very interesting. Like, I think that, like,
Oh, wow.
I don't know, like that's possible because of this weird power relation, right? Like, if you put yourself enough in the feminine position, quote unquote, the powerless position, that you can open yourself up to being considered a sexual object, even if you got the wrong parts, man. I mean, like, I don't know. Maybe I'm kind of jumping the gun on this too much, but what do you guys think about at least that? I mean, like, the weird thing is, like, I mean, like, the fundamental premise here is this: that man is the dominator. The man is the one on top. He's the one in control. He's the one in the most power. And the objects of a man's sexuality are lesser, and they're penetrated. And being penetrated, is what makes you lesser, and penetrating is what makes you stronger. This is why he suggests that straight sexuality has kind of shot through with sexism, is because you see yourself as vanquishing, dominating a lesser something, whatever you vanquish or dominated by sexually having a sexual conquest over them, which is why you think less of them, as opposed to your quote-unquote equals, who you don't sexually dominate.
I have to say, I don't know, I'm in the same realm as you, Dustin. I find this theory really nice. I like it a lot. I have to hold myself back from, like, just running with it totally, because I like it so much.
There's just one thing I want to talk to you guys about if you don't have anything.
I do want to say, well, just 2 points.
Okay, good, please.
About that. I tried to find out. I don't know how one ascertains this per se, but according to Wiki, and this is referenced from an actual psychology textbook called "Psychology Applied to Modern Life Adjustment in the 21st Century." The most common sex position is missionary with the man on top. So the woman is the bottom, and the most I don't know, how do you figure this out? I don't know. The most common sex position is the one this kind of top, man is on top, woman is on bottom sex position, and like how he brought in, like, I don't know why I like this point when he brought in, he said, like, he brought in the point where a man would be willing to say, I'm whipped, when he says, like, pussy whipped. He'd be willing to say that about his girlfriend, but he would not admit that level of subservience to another man, right? And he reads this kind of backwards, the way you might think he would read it. He would say this is because of his feeling of assured dominance over.
Yeah.
He has this. This allows. He feels his, like, own natural superiority. This allows him to expose this weakness, this little bit of what he called institutionalized weakness of himself, rather than covering it up if he's being subjugated to another man, where he would try to cover it up.
I think maybe where Fleming was trying to go with this is he might be thinking something along the lines of, okay, so if I'm pussy whipped by my wife, I'm doing what she says. It's not necessarily because of lack of ability on my part. Maybe I could, whatever the hell I want my ruler to be here. I could beat her in a fight. I could make more money than her. Whatever the hell masculine and identifier or masculine ruler I want to pull out here. Or I'm confident I can beat her on any of these scales of masculinity. But there's a reason. But I'm not. I'm saying, okay, I could do this. I know I could do it. All of you, my fellow men, know I could beat her and met on this masculine ruler. So I'm just letting her whip. There's a level to which I'm letting her whip me to make her happy. You have to keep the missus happy. You have to give her ground. But if I were to say, like, I don't know, this would be kind of, I'm pussy whipped by Justin. So, I'm cock whipped.
Wow.
And Justin's cock whipping me.
Wow.
Maybe there wouldn't be a. When I'm saying this to Dustin, he wouldn't immediately think, yeah, but you could still beat him on any comparisons by a ruler of masculinity. The friends I'm telling this to would not make that assumption, perhaps.
Yeah, it's just because you're not seeing your wife on it. Well, what he claims is you're not seeing the female companion at an equal level, right? I mean, fundamentally, you're not seeing her as an equal because you're dominating her. And not part of that comparison. Yeah, I don't know. I like that part especially.
I mean, it's kind of extreme. I don't know how far to take it, but I just like the fact that he is going this very dangerous realm of trying to figure out the power relations in sex, right?
But I mean, like, if anything can explain bondage and sadism, I mean, it's going to be this, right? That people enjoy sexually these power relations, and sometimes enjoy being dominated, right? Mm-hmm. in a safe zone, right? And he talks about how you can set up these zones that don't necessarily have to carry over into the real world. Like you talked about your zone of play in games, right? I mean, you can set up this safe zone of sex where you can experiment with domination, sadism, and all these things, and then leave that there, and then hopefully carry on into the world, treating your loved one as an equal, right? I mean, you can have this kind of, but then I guess he's suggesting that sex itself is inherently kind of problematic, right? And simply in the fact that one person is dominated or penetrated, and the other one is being penetrated, penetrating and being penetrated. I don't know. Like, I just want to ask you then one quick question. Both of you. Like, I like this a lot. I just want to ask the question: is it possible to read it the opposite way? Couldn't there be a world in which, like we talked about jokingly about this before, there's not a dynamic of penetration and being penetrated, but of encapsulating and being encapsulated? So in other words, a world in which it's thought of to encapsulate is the dominate, and to be encapsulated is the weaker position.
Oh wow.
Possible.
Like, okay, so wow, maybe I need to break open my copy of Andrea Dworkin over here, but like, I guess the thing is, like, this is the reason why I looked up on Wikipedia the most common sex position, because like, if it is missionary with the man on top thrusting, how do you come at that as encapsulating? It would have to be
cowgirl.
Yeah, exactly. Right,
Yeah.
and I mean, like, then I'm there. I can totally see that. Like, if the woman is on top, like, kind of doing the motions or whatever, right? I could totally see this encapsulating viewpoint coming in. But if missionary is the number one,
I know, like, right? It seems like and I agree with what he's suggesting. Is that just the nature of sex itself tends to make the man the dominator, tends to make the woman dominated because of the way our parts are positioned. I just want to kind of wonder, is it possible, just as a possibility, for this alternate world to exist?
It would be, with our current, biology, I think it would be difficult because, of course, there is this thrusting dynamic, but there is also the erection dynamic. Like, I mean, you can force your, don't do this, people. This is wrong and rape. But you can force yourself upon a woman with your erect penis. But it's very men. Of course, men can still be raped. You can still you can put the limp penis in you can't get erect. But the fact that
you can also force a man to be erect.
There you go. Oh, but there is this kind of erection action is similar to, say, pulling out your sword, or for lack of a better euphemism. So it does kind of imply, or at least associate with, a forward action on part of the man.
I mean, this is where he talks about the quarter hours on the watch. I don't know why I like that metaphor so much, but yeah. It reminded me of a little bit of, like, if someone was going to talk about, like, remember Wittgenstein in the Philosophical Investigations, he talked about how, like, you keep on digging and digging and digging, and pretty soon your spade hits solid dirt and you can dig no longer. But I think maybe he's trying to say something like there's some kind of weird flow that, maybe something along just from the very nature of the parts, they seem to have this flow, but no, you by no means do you have to follow this flow. It just seems to flow this way.
The tendency to flow.
A tendency that seems to have a tendency to flow this way.
Well, don't worry. With juicy air and all the cyber sex parts, then you can live out your fantasies of dominating all you want.
So
Thank
also,
you, technology.
The holodeck.
With that watch face thing, it does say, you don't have to, the hand doesn't have to be positioned on the quarter hours.
Yeah.
It can be positioned, slightly. You can position it slightly off, or even in the opposite direction. This is where he says, but you're still positioning it in relation to those things. So to the quarter hour. So it kind of seems like maybe this is one of the because to him, this penetration dynamic is a huge part of the power relationship in sex, and kind of seems to suggest that even when you're in this domination, you're being dominated, that you're the one being tied up as the man, and there is an extent, perhaps a extent to which you're enjoying this due to its relation to the normal. Let me get my quotation marks around normal. The normal sexual dynamic of the man being the aggressor.
Yeah. I just want to ask, well, we're way too long. We've gone way too long tonight, so I just want to ask one last question of both of you. And I'll say my answer first. I think I don't have a problem with sex being problematic in this sense. I don't know why, but I do know why. Sex being a place where you can fantasize and engage in fantasies of domination and submission doesn't strike me as something that's inherently bad, like Andrea Dworkin would have you believe, right? It's an inherently problematic relationship that can't somehow be fixed by careful reflection. So I don't know. I'm going to say, you know, like, despite this not being a very liberal attitude, I'm going to say, you know, I don't find it to be a bad thing that there's a space where you can have these fantasies open to you. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm on your side, friend.
I'm gonna agree with that. I just want to say, like, I just want to add on to that. And I'm sure you'll agree with me on this, but I just want to add on to this the fact that, but that doesn't mean you can't read something of your own psychology of which fantasies you engage in. You definitely can read something of your own psychology out of that. But like maybe having this space to engage in this, I'm fine with that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but it could very well be possible that these fantasies of domination also help in different ways in your life.
Oh yeah, I mean, you got to be really careful with something like this. You can't read something directly. You can't read. I mean, I think it might be a mistake to read a fantasy as a frustrated desire, right? This might lead to some very false conclusions. Fantasies are not always frustrated desires, it's directly, right?
All right, so we've gone long, very long. I guess the next time we'll be finishing up this book and talking about thoughts. I really enjoyed this reading this week, and I thought it was great.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bruce Fleming.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce Fleming. We look forward to your comments and comments from all of our other viewers.
Yeah.
Sorry if you, especially in my case, I took the conversation into some weird realms. We hope you enjoy the.
I brought it to Anita Sarkeesian. That's my fault.
Well, that's okay. If anything, we've learned from Thunderfoot. But mentioning Anita Sarkeesian as much as possible is a good marketing tactic.
It certainly is.
He's up.
I don't know if what we said will get us thumbs up, though. Oh, well. Okay.
Thumbs down.
Let's get... I guess that's better than nothing. Wait a minute, viewers. Don't do that. No, thumbs up, please.
So, yeah, next week, just to spark your interest, I hope, of course, you're reading the book. If not, I hope you're excited because we're going to talk about why do we argue and how do we win arguments.
Ooh. How to win every argument coming up next. You just move on, don't you? Okay, so I'll see you guys, everyone, all our viewer next week or soon, maybe in 2 weeks. Thanks for watching and participating. Comments, please, and we'll see you.
Oh.
Something tells me that was not supposed to happen.
Let's exit out of here because it says live at the top.
Yes. All right, so some technical difficulties, friends. Hopefully this fixed that. This is them. And bye and see you next week.
Yeah.